Pure Farming 2018 is the most unexpectedly, quietly emotional game you'll ever play. Though, as with all things in life, this is something that will vary with your personal experience. For me, it comes down to two things, and one of those is the soundtrack. Any solo piano tune will do, any stirring piece of soundtrack music, anything that moves you will make this game feel fundamentally profound. The other reason I have found myself approaching tears as my tractor cuts its way through the idyllic Montana landscape comes down to my recent repeat viewing of Oliver Stone's excellent The Untold History of the United States, and the often untold story of Henry Wallace, the 33rd Vice President of the US and a man who came oh so close to changing the course of history in the 20th century. Wallace, the son of Secretary of Agriculture Henry Cantwell Wallace, had farming in his blood. He was a man with a degree in animal husbandry, a successful farming business, and was an early advocate of both equal pay and civil rights. Eventually working his way up to the role of vice president under Roosevelt, Wallace retained his belief in the potential for good in humanity, embodying the liberalism and utopianism of Roosevelt's New Deal. Why then the connection to Pure Farming 2018? Well, Wallace, in a now famous speech, called not for a American century, but a century for the common man.
I say that the century on which we are entering, the century which will come out of this war, can be and must be the century of the common man.
Not imperialism, but duty, genuine revolution by the people and for the people. I've been wondering recently why a farming simulator has struck such a deep chord with me. In my home state of South Australia, we have just elected a government on the far edge of the right-wing one, which now matches our equally far-right federal government. The notion of the common human being could not be farther from our lives right now as the way is cleared for big business and the niche rich to prosper. Video games have always dealt in power fantasies, often to negative outcomes, as is eloquently described by Matt Lees in his excellent Cultural Complicity talk at Gamescom 2017. As he rightfully points out, if you keep selling people the same negative power fantasies, there are going to be repercussions. But Pure Farming 2018 is selling an entirely different, much quieter and more positive kind of fantasy. Playing through the campaign, you find yourself inheriting your grandfather's surprisingly high-tech, but also debt-ridden farm. Against the advice of your father and all financial sense, in a narrative move that would satisfy both Joseph Campbell and every high school sports movie ever, you take on the mounting debt and resign yourself to a simpler existence, ploughing fields and tending to your crops. It is no exaggeration that, as a left-wing progressive, I feel like my world is constantly under threat. From the way that our cultural discourse has been pulled to the far right, where reason and logic are shouted down from all quarters, where extremist governments seem to pop up everywhere at the behest of the will of the people. Pure farming is a power fantasy that allows me to put all this aside for the moment. It instills in me, again, the hopefulness of Wallace's century of the common man, of collectivism, of community. I've never been interested in farming, or the outdoors generally, or machinery, no. Instead, what I get from Pure Farming is something much more metaphysical. Aside from the obvious philosophical and political readings of a farming game text, after all, the plight of the worker in fighting bourgeoisie alienation is a key component of Marxism, there is also something much deeper, much more stirring here. Slowly ploughing, sowing, irrigating and harvesting my crops made me aware of time, aware of its passing. In Japanese, the term mono no aware refers to the awareness of impermanence, the transience of all things. As I harvested my fields of wheat, I became aware that this was but one harvest of potentially thousands in that field. It would produce wheat long after I had returned to dust. Soon after this moment, I found myself standing alone in my field, amongst all the things that I had grown, reflecting on life, reflecting on time and actions and loves both old and new, long lost and newly found. And I have to admit, a tear or two welled up in my eye. The moment was such a pure evocation of the fragility and beauty of life. I didn't despair though, and even in Pure Farming there have been moments of levity as I have accidentally sent my pickup truck sailing out into some great blue lake. The music you've been listening to is my song Chase the Sun by my band Only Objects. I chose it because it is also about journeys, about chasing the idea of home, about trying to find the feeling of knowing you belong, and we rarely do. But there is no despair in that, because in the chase we find hope, we find peace, and for those very lucky few, we might even find love. So too for Henry Wallace, who was cruelly denied his chance to become president when he was ousted in the 1944 Democratic Convention as what is now seen as a coup d'etat in the party, one which ended with Harry S. Truman in power, who took the country in a very different direction after Roosevelt's death. Wallace never gave up though, as he knew the struggle was the important notion, and that struggle in whatever small way finds a fictional outlet in pure farming, the most emotional, quiet, and defiantly lovely game you will play this year. Perhaps you'll come and chase the sun with me.